I will not speak a lot, but just remind the audience of a historical fact which you might want to ponder over while the next speaker against the motion comes to the dais. And that is that since the Second World War, 12 Asian countries that gained independence have drafted their own constitutions. Today in 2024, out of these 12 constitutions that were written post-World War II, only 3 have survived: Taiwan's, Korea's, and India's. 9 have been scrapped or changed completely. On that note, may I ask Vikramjit Banerjee to speak against the motion.
Thank you. Respected Chairman, sir, my learned friends of the proposition, my worthy opponents and friends. Now, when we talk about this topic, we have to decide 2 things. The first thing is, what is the Constitution? Is the Constitution, as the Americans say, is the text. It's the text which you see. Those provisions, that statute book, is that the Constitution? If that is the Constitution, then in 1949, when the Constitution was framed, it had 395 provisions. Today, it has 448 provisions. The Constitution has been changed over and over again. What my learned friends of the proposition are arguing is that you can change it by parts, but you need not relook at the Constitution. You know, you can change a car completely, but you can't buy yourself a new car, or you can't even think of buying yourself a new car. Now, if you look at, that's the way the Americans look at it. Now, that is why the Americans have very few amendments in their Constitution. Now, let's look at it, let us look at constitutional law, which my learned friends talk about. Let's, beyond the Constitution. Because Constitution is something which is fundamental, based on which the governance of this country or any country is run. Now, I will give you some examples of constitutional law which runs the country, which is not necessarily part of the document. First, I don't know how many of you know, there was an Article 35A of a presidential order which was incorporated through the use of Article 370, classifying residents of Jammu and Kashmir as different from the rest of India. Do you know that? That was a presidential order. That did not technically exist as part of the Constitution. Do you know that the definition of who is a scheduled caste and Dalit is made through a presidential order? Do you know that, most incredibly, that we talk about reservations, which is such an integral part of our Constitution and our constitutional scheme, that it is made through an office memorandum of the Department of Personnel and Training in 1993. So this is what you are talking about your Constitution. Whether you want to define who is a minority, that is defined in terms of the National Minorities Act. That the Constitution has some basic features that is defined by Keshavananda Bharati, which my learned friends spoke about. So if you are talking about these things, and even the definition of secularism, that the definition of secularism is not the American secularism, but we have an Indian secularism, that is defined by judgments of the Supreme Court. Constitutions change, constitutional law changes, and it changes all the time. And there is nothing sacrosanct about it. Now the next thing, let's talk about something more important, something which weighs with the court, with the Honorable Chief Minister spoke about, with my learned friends spoke about. Let's talk about questions of the values of the Constitution. Jefferson, I don't know how many of you know, Jefferson was one of the founding fathers of the American Constitution. Jefferson said, very interestingly, he said, every constitution should be only for 20 years. Because this generation does not have a right to bind future generations. So I can only make a constitution for myself. Second, I don't know how many of you know this, that when the word secularism and socialism was suggested to be brought into the constitution by the Constituent Assembly, it was rejected 4 times. I don't know how many of you know that K.T. Shah, who was a member of the Constituent Assembly, kept on proposing, saying that incorporate socialism and secularism. Then Baba Saheb Ambedkar gets up and he says, in the end he can't handle it anymore. So he gets up and says, I don't want values into the constitution. Don't put values in the constitution. Because who knows what the future, what values they would hold, what sort of form of governance they would like. Even Baba Saheb Ambedkar agreed that this constitution is a journey, not an end. You look at even Justice Matthew and Keshananda Bharati speaking about basic structure, said, what is basic structure today may not be basic structure tomorrow. I'm sure, as it was discussed, secularism and socialism were brought into the constitution by the 42nd Amendment, which was made during the emergency. So what permanent values are you talking about? Right to your fundamental property, fundamental right of property was taken away in 1978 under the Janta government and put in as a constitutional right away from a fundamental right. These are fundamental values of governance. It was changed. Now let's come on to the other very important question. Do you think that everything is perfect with this constitution? Does anyone here think that this constitution is perfect? It's incredible. There is nothing wrong in it. I don't think anyone says that. If you said that, there wouldn't be so many amendments. I think any one of us who rationally discusses the constitution will never say that there's nothing wrong in the constitution. The constitution, and which no one talks about, but anyone who studies constitutional law will know that the basic structure, the structure of the constitution is based on the Government of India Act of 1935 with a fundamental rights chapter, with a chapter on directive principles of state policy, and then subsequent amendments to Nyayapalika and Panchayat and Nagarpalika subsequently later. But the basic structure of the constitution as we know it is a direct replica of the Government of India Act 1935. Now there's nothing wrong in it. But the fact that it was framed, it was not even discussed in India. It was discussed in the Parliament of Britain. Now, of course, we are speaking in English. But there is no doubt about it that our people like us did not apply their mind as to how the structure, the basic structure and fundamental power of dynamics of this constitution were ever going to be framed. Now, let us discuss another question. Are you satisfied with the way federalism works? The Honorable Chief Minister wasn't. Don't you think that takes a look? Don't you think we also need to take a look of how to make our elected representatives more accountable to us? Don't you think we should also look at how judges select judges in this country? We need to take a look at all these things. Do we also take a look at as to whether we need to bring back fundamental right to property into this constitution? I think we should. Don't you think that we should have a mechanism to ensure that, various different things which have gone wrong in our constitutions are corrected? Of course. We need to look at it over and over again. And most importantly, and this is what was discussed, and this is the crux of this debate today. Don't you think that in this age where Black Lives Matter, in this age when statues of colonialists throughout the world are being torn down one after another in the highest of high places, and even in Oxford, statues of roads are brought down. Don't you think in this age it is important for us to discuss decolonization? And in this city where we brought down the biggest colonial empire in the world. Of course, people died for it, people physically fought for it, and we managed, and it was greatly difficult. 200 years old, a colonial empire which stretched the entire world, which is physically powerful. We brought it down. We not only brought it down by physically fighting for it, but we brought it down by our ideas. We brought it down and destroyed it with our ideas. Don't you think that after 70 years, it is time to think about it? Because the ideas which started off in India, in this city, spread all over the world and changed the world forever. The ideas of decolonization started in this city, in these wonderful institutions in this city, the institutions of discussion, the institutions where the Raj was taken on. And isn't it time now, isn't this place a good enough place to start that discussion once again? What better place, what better time? What Bengal thinks today, India will think tomorrow. Thank you, Vande Mataram.
Thank you, Vikramjit. Again, the only thing I can think of when hearing the Additional Solicitor General of India speak is a quotation by Charles Darwin, and you will forgive me for being a man of biology, but Darwin wrote in his Survival of the Fittest, and I quote Darwin, he said, "The Homo sapiens is not the strongest of the species that survive, nor is it the most intelligent species on this planet. However, it is the one most responsive to change. And that's what makes me vote it as the fittest species on the planet." On that note, may I invite Prosenjit Bose to deliver his thoughts in favor of the motion.
সকলকে নমস্কার. Esteemed chairperson of the session, distinguished fellow panelists, ladies and gentlemen. We have been offered a very peculiar argument on behalf of the opposition, which is basically creating straw men. We are not really so far debating the elephant in the room. We need to change the constitution, we need a new constitution because the right to education in the constitution is not there properly. See, so many people are still out of school 75 years after independence. You see, we have to change the constitution because the right to healthcare has not been given. There is, the sedition law is still there, and preventive detention is there. All kinds of things are being said. But is that the reason why the powers that be at the center today want to change the constitution? I think that is the elephant in the room that we are not discussing in the debate. Don't be evasive. Please come to the point. You cannot discuss the American Constitution without discussing America's Declaration of Independence. You cannot discuss the French Constitution, the Republican French Constitution, without discussing the Declaration of the Rights of Man and the Citizen. You cannot discuss in India's Constitution without reference to the freedom struggle which gave birth to that Constitution. And what was that freedom struggle? The core of the ideological debate during the freedom struggle was there were many debates. Gandhi didn't agree with Nehru didn't agree with Ambedkar, Bhagat Singh didn't agree with Gandhi, Subhash Chandra Bose had his own issues with non-violence, and so on and so forth. But every freedom fighter worth his salt always believed that this fight for our country's freedom is for everybody, irrespective of your religion, your caste, your creed. We will create a country which is for everybody. That is the core of the debate. And those who oppose that it is that with all its debates, that is why it is so long. There are so many debates. This constitution in a society 2000 years old, which didn't allow people, there was untouchability. There are religious texts which say, "Ki pour molten lead in the ears of women and Dalits if the mantras of Veda entered their ears." And this constitution, this revolutionary constitution in one stroke put an end to untouchability, gave equal rights to people, said that one person, one vote, one value. You can be a big businessman, you can be a rickshaw puller, you can be a farmer, you are all equal. That is the core issue that is at stake. So when you are talking about a new constitution, yes, that is where our leader from our side has put it very categorically, that the fundamental, the basic structure of the constitution, that is what is at stake. So whatever else you raise, those are minor issues. The constitution has been changed many times. You can keep on changing them. But what cannot be changed is the fact that this is a secular country. This is a country that belongs to all. This is a democracy. This is a multi-party democracy. What happened to the Soviet Union? Learn from the mistakes. Learn from the mistakes. What has happened to China? They today in 2018, they even removed that two-term restriction on the post of president. And when you are talking about a new constitution, today the people who are in power, what did their ancestors do? They never believed in this secular vision of composite nationalism. They were talking about a Hindu Rashtra for the past almost 100 years. And they were saying that this should be, because it's a Hindu majority country, the minorities should not have any right. They eulogized Hitler. They said we should learn, I'm quoting from Golgotha. He said, we should learn from Hitler and his treatment of the Jews. That is what we should do to our minorities. This is the ideological vision of those who are in power. And in that context, when they are in power, they are talking about one nation, one vote. Why? Why should there be one vote in one nation when it is a federal constitution where there are so many states? So in that context, when you talk about whether we need a new constitution, it becomes a debate over the core ideological principles. And please take a position on that debate. Don't bring these side issues that you are bringing. Where do you stand on that debate? And I think that this august house will agree that the framers of our constitution had this in mind, that India is a very old civilization. You see the kind of debates we are having today. These are not these Chinese legal debates that happen in social media. Suddenly we see from the government side, India should not be called India anymore. Why? Only Bharat. Article 1 of our constitution says, India, that is Bharat. They say, no, Bharat is from Vedas, Rig Vedas. So what? India is also where does the name India come from? From the Indus River. The name Hindu, the majority of our country, that Hindu comes from the name of that river, that civilization. In 5th century BC, you had Greek philosophers, Greek historians talking about Hindus. There was a Greek ambassador in Chandragupta Maurya's court, and Megasthenes, he wrote a book called Indica. So even India, and it predates even the birth of the English language. It's not about British colonialism. It's not that the British came and called us India. We have been called India and we have been called Bharat from ancient times. That is the beauty of our culture. That is what the founding fathers and mothers of our country, they believed in from the core of their heart. What is unfortunate today is what are we seeing? That the powers of that be today, what are they attempting? One after the other, and it is most unfortunate. I don't want to explicitly criticize, but one cannot but express one's anguish at certain judgments of the Honorable Supreme Court. A judgment which itself says that a structure, the way it was demolished, was wrong. It was unlawful. As something which is wrong, unlawful. It was demolished. And yet, what was allowed to happen on 22nd of January in our country? This state is secular means the state doesn't have any religion. All of us are free to believe in what we believe in. But the state does not have any religion. Why should our constitution expressly prohibits taxpayers' money from being used to promote religious causes? There's a explicit provision. Why was the Indian Army, Indian Navy, and all apparatuses of the state, they are being utilized for the inauguration of a temple, and that too on the eve of a Lok Sabha election, which is the biggest example of mixing religion with politics, which is the antithesis of secularism. This is the, I think, direction in which the powers that be want to change the constitution. And there, I think that the answer to this, especially from Bengal, from Calcutta, the response should be a resounding no, that we do not want such a change in the India's constitution. India's constitution should remain firmly secular, democratic, and republican. That is the way we have been. That is the way we will survive all together, irrespective of our religious belief, our political belief, or whatever. We will all remain as Indians if we remain true to this core vision of our freedom struggle, which is enshrined in our constitution. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prosenjit, for bringing in a definitely new angle to this debate and pointing out the main apprehension of the proposition today, or one of the main apprehensions of the proposition today. The new constitution may no longer incorporate the word secular as a part of this country's aims. And I think that is an apprehension that is resounding across the board for those who feel the constitution should not be changed. In fact, even democracy, he points out, could be at peril if the constitution is changed. And as I say, already democracy in this country has changed. When we say it is for the people, by the people, of the people, today we should spell it for the people, F-A-R, the people, by the people, B-Y-E, the people, and of the people, O-double-F, the people. And therefore, democracy can be interpreted depending on those that are in power. We talk a lot about our freedom of speech. There is no doubt that all of us here have a freedom of speech in the country. But today the question is, both in this state and in the center, do we have freedom after our speech? And that's the question I often ask myself. As I invite to the dais Sugato Bose to speak against the motion.
Mr. Chairman, sir, and members of the House, I rise to speak against this strangely negatively phrased and defeatist motion placed before this august House. The arguments so far put forward by my friends on the other side are based on fables and fairy tales about the founding moment of our republic. I could understand Justice Sanjeev Banerjee and Mr. Rupen Roy believing in such fairy tales dished out by our so-called liberal commentators. But I was astonished that Mr. Prosenjit Bose seemed to also fall for these fables. Has he forgotten the sophisticated leftist critiques of the Constitution of 1950 as it was being framed? Has he forgotten the speeches of Jyoti Basu in the West Bengal Legislative Assembly against the West Bengal Security Act and the emergency provisions, both in Malaya and in India, of that period? More than 100 years ago, Subhash Chandra Bose wrote to Deshobandhu Chittaranjan Das on 2nd March 1921 that we must now craft India's constitution based on Swaraj. স্বরাজের ভিত্তির ওপর আমাদের এখন ভারতের কনস্টিটিউশন তৈয়ারি করিতে হইবে. We as a people never did so. Instead, we adapted and adopted what Argho Sengupta has eloquently called the colonial constitution that had held us in bondage, and we inherited the worst features of colonial authoritarianism. The Constitution of 1950 was by no means the culmination of our freedom struggle. And that is why there is an urgent need today to fearlessly engage in a battle of ideas so that we can produce a new, genuinely democratic constitution that would be built on the pillars of egalitarianism, federalism, and religious harmony. Argho has already told you about the long and deep constitutional culture of India, going back to ancient times and through the age of the Mughal Empire. What I would like to emphasize is what a young historian, a student of mine, Aniket De, has called a robust political tradition of anti-colonial constitutionalism. The British tried to rule us through their own constitutional devices of 1909, 1919, and then the Government of India Act of 1935. They wanted to perpetuate British colonial rule. But our freedom fighters had a different conception of what a constitution should be. Even the word Sangbidhan was used by Rabindranath Tagore in his essays Swadeshi Samaj. And 100 years ago, the Swarajists, led by Deshobandhu Chittaranjan Das and Subhash Chandra Bose, had produced a federal constitution at the same time as they introduced a pact for the equitable sharing of power between Hindus and Muslims. There were many such constitutions in those days. Bhagat Singh's Hindustan Socialist Republican Association produced a constitution. The Ghadar Party produced a constitution. We have this tradition of anti-colonial constitutionalism which was not reflected when we won independence. We never had a popularly elected constituent assembly. Subhash Chandra Bose had rejected in 1939 the Indian National Congress's proposal of a constitutional convention under imperialist auspices. He had shown how Sinn Féin had rejected Lloyd George's constitutional convention, and for Prosenjit Bose, how the Bolsheviks had walked out of the Constituent Assembly in 1917 in Russia. A genuine Constituent Assembly with popular sanction could only have been created after the seizure of power by our nationalists. Instead, we had an indirectly elected Constituent Assembly, elected by state legislators, who themselves had been elected based on a very limited franchise. And yet, there were some members of the Constituent Assembly who still wanted to cling to the ideals of the freedom struggle. Unlike the Congress High Command, led by Jawaharlal Nehru, who were turning their backs on the freedom struggle's ideals and opting for post-colonial continuity, there were those who came forward to uphold those ideals. In fact, K.T. Shah was one of them, and he introduced an amendment to Article 1 to declare that India shall be a secular, federal, socialist union of states. Now, it's true, as Vikramjit pointed out, that secularism and socialism ideologies, which Ambedkar didn't want to put into the constitution, but the idea of a federal union of states has become extremely salient again today. Another member of the Constituent Assembly, Harivishnu Kamath, strenuously argued against the emergency provisions that were introduced in Part 18. And he said that these were like Article 48 of the Weimar Constitution, which Hitler had used to facilitate his dictatorship. And he said it was a day of sorrow and a shame when emergency provisions were included in our Constitution, and even the suspension of habeas corpus, the basic individual liberty, became part of our Constitution. Ambedkar had thanked these rebels of the Constitution, saying that they had enlivened the proceedings, but unfortunately they were not able to contribute to the substance of the final product. Ambedkar conceded during the debates that these provisions, these authoritarian features might be misused in the future, and he simply expressed the pious hope that they will not be brought into operation and that they will remain a dead letter. By contrast, Sharath Chandra Bose, in an article in the Indian Law Review in January of 1950, said that these were like time bombs which posed a grave threat to Indian democracy in the future. So we have authoritarianism that needs to be expunged. Also, we failed on the front of federalism. During the emergency, 4 out of 5 judges of the Supreme Court said that the suspension of habeas corpus was perfectly constitutional. I would like to know from Justice Sanjeev Banerjee whether he agreed with the dissent of Justice Khanna or the view of the 4 other judges who carried the day. Look at the recent verdict on Kashmir, which has already been referred to from this side of the House. What I will add is that the implications of this judgment are dire. It has been said that our Constitution gives the President the right to divide and change the status of any state of the Union. It is not just the question of Gorkhaland. Under President's rule, the center can divide Bengal between north and south and reduce us to the status of 2 union territories. Nothing could be a greater affront to the question of federalism and democracy in this country. Finally, I would really want to return to the question of preventive detention. That is because we oppose the UAPA and the amendment pushed through in 2019 by the central government. But how can we forget that it was the same Constituent Assembly sitting as the Provisional Parliament of India which in February of 1950 passed the most draconian law, Preventive Detention Act. That was the basis of the sacrifice of our liberties. And so finally, I will simply, with the indulgence of the chair, say that all of you sitting in this audience, and I see many young faces, have the right to decide what kind of constitution should govern us in the 21st century. And therefore, the need of the hour, let me emphasize need, the need of the hour is a new constitution, and let me also emphasize the word new. And let us at long last craft a constitution of India on the basis of Swaraj that Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose had called for more than 100 years ago. Jai Hind.
Thank you, Shugatada. I think a very noteworthy sentence in his speech was one of the reasons that we need to get a new constitution is because authoritarianism needs to be expunged. Suggesting, therefore, that the present dispensation in power does not believe in authoritarianism at all, and they will have a constitution which will not have any hint of authoritarianism. I will not pass any judgment on this matter, but I will pass it on to the last speaker, speaking for the motion, Alka Lamba, who might have a word to say about this.
रसगुल्लों और मिठास की नगरी कैलकाटा में और कैलकाटा क्लब के इस प्रांगण में टेलीग्राफ द्वारा आयोजित इस चर्चा में आप सभी को मेरा जय संविधान। आज यहां पर मैं उस संविधान को बचाने के लिए खड़ी हुई हूं जिस संविधान ने अब तक हमें बचाया है। आज ये नौबत आ गई कि जिस संविधान की पे हमारे इस भारत की मजबूत नींव और एक बुलंद इमारत खड़ी है, आज वो हिल रही है और हमसे कह रही है आगे बढ़ो। ये संविधान पर हमला नहीं है, ये लोकतंत्र पर हमला है, ये हमारी आजादी पर हमला है। मैं देख रही हूं कि आजादी के इस आजाद भारत में मेरे जैसे जो युवा हैं, उनका इस आजादी में कहें तो खून तो दूर की बात, पसीना भी बहाने को नहीं मिला है। लेकिन आज हमारे कंधों पर यह जिम्मेदारी आ गई है कि जो विरासत में हमें यह संविधान मिला है, आज उस संविधान की रक्षा करने के लिए खड़ी हूं और पूरी ईमानदारी के साथ अंतिम सांस तक इस संविधान पर आंच नहीं आने दूंगी। इस मंच पर अकेली नारी हूं, पंक्ति में अंतिम खड़ी हूं। मैं नहीं हूं, मैं भारत की नारी हूं और मुझे यह अधिकार मेरे संविधान ने दिया है। इस संविधान ने ही संशोधन के माध्यम से पंचायत और नगर निगमों में इस आधी आबादी को हक दिया कि 14 लाख हमारी बहनें इस देश में पंच और सरपंच हैं, नगर निगम और मेयर हैं और अपनी आवाज बुलंद कर रही हैं। कैसे उन आवाजों का हनन हम होने दें? आज बात हो रही है आजादी की। लोकतंत्र में बार बार कहा जाता है लोकतंत्र की हत्या हो रही है, आवाजों को कुचला जा रहा है। मैं भारत की राजधानी दिल्ली से आ रही हूं। बहुत से कॉन्क्लेव, बहुत से बड़े चैनल डिबेट कर रहे हैं, लेकिन 5 सितारा के बंद कमरों में एक दिशा निर्देश के तहत ये कलकत्ता में ही संभव देख रही हूं कि खुला मंच है, पक्ष और विपक्ष है और लोगों के बीच में अदालत लगी हुई है। काश ये नजारा दिल्ली में देखने को भी मिलता हो। कलम यहां पर बार बार दिखाई गई। एक कलम है जो आजादी से लिखती हुई नहीं दिख रही, वो कलम दोबारा दिखाई जाए। 2 मजबूत हाथों ने उस कलम को पकड़ा हुआ है, थामा हुआ है। क्यों थामा हुआ है? वो कलम कैसी दिखनी चाहिए थी? आजादी से, स्वतंत्रता से लिखते हुए। लेकिन आज उस कलम पर कमल हावी हो चुका है, इसलिए 2 मजबूत हाथ उसे थामे बैठे हैं। टेलीग्राफ के लिए, उसकी बहादुर पत्रकारिता के लिए, लोकतंत्र के उठते सवालों को मुख्य पत्र पर छापना, सवाल करना, उसके लिए मैं आपका साधुवाद करती हूं कि आप वो हिम्मत दिखा रहे हैं। भारतीय राष्ट्रीय महिला कांग्रेस की राष्ट्रीय अध्यक्ष हुए मुझे अभी कुल 40 दिन नहीं हुए। इन 40 दिनों में 20 राज्यों से होकर यहां पर पहुंची हूं। 20 के 20 राज्यों में इस संविधान को लेकर, 1 नेशन 1 इलेक्शन को लेकर हर तरह की चर्चा है और मुझे लगता है चर्चा के पीछे मकसद सिर्फ एक है, वो है मेन मुद्दों से भटका देना। आज हमारा नेता श्री राहुल गांधी जी पहले भारत जोड़ो यात्रा 4000 किलोमीटर कन्याकुमारी से कश्मीर, और अब भारत जोड़ो न्याय यात्रा पूर्व से पश्चिम कर रहे हैं। 10,000 किलोमीटर की ये यात्रा देश के किसान हो, बेरोजगार युवा हो, महिला हो, आदिवासी हो, दलित हो, उनसे गुजर कर निकल रही है। आज लोकतंत्र है ना, तो लोकतंत्र तो ये कहता है कि संसद के अंदर चर्चा होनी चाहिए, कानून बनाने से पहले चर्चा होनी चाहिए, सहमतियां होनी चाहिए। क्या हुआ कृषि कानून को लेकर? तालेबंदी में तानाशाही से बिना संसद भवन के, बिना चर्चा के कानून थोप दिया गया हमारे अन्नदाताओं को। 1 साल आंदोलन चलता है, 700 किसान शहीद हो जाते हैं, और आज अभी इस समय भी हमारा किसान, हमारा आंदोलन दिल्ली की दहलीज पर आंदोलित कर रहा है। आवाजें नहीं सुनी जा रही, लोकतंत्र में कुचली जा रही हैं। पहली बार आविष्कार हुआ है कि ड्रोन से सफलतापूर्वक आंसू गैस कैसे छोड़ी जाती है। इस पे आविष्कार हुआ है कि ड्रोन से पहली बार यह किया गया है। मैं सिर्फ आपसे यही कहूंगी, राहुल गांधी जी की यात्रा 5 बिंदुओं पर है। वो पांचों के पांचों बिंदु हमारे संविधान में है। नारी न्याय की बात हो रही है, युवा न्याय की बात हो रही है, भागीदारी न्याय की बात हो रही है, किसान न्याय और श्रमिक न्याय की बात हो रही है। बात इन पे होनी चाहिए, पर बात उन मुद्दों पर हो रही है जिस पे शायद इस देश में सहमतियां बनाने में अभी समय लगेगा, लेकिन संख्या और बहुमत के दम पर आप उसे थोपने की कोशिश इस देश पे मत करिए। 150 सांसदों को संसद से, 75 साल की आजादी में कभी नहीं हुआ कि संसद में एक बार में 150 सांसदों की आवाज को कुचल दिया जाए, उन्हें बाहर कर दिया जाए। और कैसे कानून आए? अभी हमारे साथी जो उधर से हैं, जजेस के बेंचेस की फैसलों के जिक्र कर रहे थे कि कब कब 5 जजेस की बेंच ने किस जो है संख्या से फैसले दिए। उस बेंच ने तो यह भी फैसला किया था कि 2024 के लोकतंत्र में जो है चुनावों से पहले चुनाव आयुक्त और 2 सदस्यों की नियुक्ति निष्पक्षता से होनी चाहिए। यह फैसला सत्ता नहीं करेगी, एक पैनल करेगा। उस पैनल में देश के प्रधानमंत्री होंगे, नेता विपक्ष होगा और मुख्य न्यायाधीश चीफ जस्टिस ऑफ इंडिया होंगे। किसी को इस लोकतंत्र में 140 करोड़ के भारत को पूछिए, किसी को इस पे आपत्ति हो सकती थी, लेकिन सत्ता को आपत्ति थी। इसलिए संख्या का सांसदों को बर्खास्त करके विपक्ष के कानून बदल दिया कि मुख्य चुनाव आयुक्त और 2 सदस्यों की नियुक्ति 2024 के चुनावों से पहले एक पैनल नहीं करेगा, सत्ता करेगी। और आज वो मुख्य चुनाव आयुक्त, क्या मजबूरी है, क्या दबाव है, पूछना चाहते हैं कि 5 महीने से कांग्रेस और हमारे विपक्ष की दल के नेता 5 महीने से मुख्य चुनाव आयुक्त से समय मांग रहे हैं। आप सोचिए ऐसा क्या होना चाहिए? और 5 महीने से मुख्य चुनाव आयुक्त पर क्या दबाव है, क्या मजबूरी है, क्या लालच है कि 24 से पहले आपको हम मिलना चाहते हैं, 5 महीने से पत्र लिख रहे हैं, पर वो हमें समय मिलने का नहीं देते हैं। लोकतंत्र में बहुत से सवाल उठ रहे हैं। कृषि कानून हो, सेना की भर्ती, बिना किसी चर्चा के सेना के पूर्व जनरल ने कहा है, नरवाने जी ने, कि यह अग्निपथ ठेके की 4 साल की नौकरी सेना को कमजोर करने का काम करेगी। और बिल्कुल ऐसी कभी सेना में चर्चा नहीं हुई कि तीनों सेनाओं में से थोप दिया जाएगा, पक्की भर्तियां खत्म कर दी जाएंगी। शहीद से शहीद का दर्जा छीन लिया गया है, शहीद से उसका जो सम्मान था, कफन में तिरंगा, वो छीन लिया गया है। कहां चर्चा हो रही है? 1.5 लाख युवा, भारत की राजधानी दिल्ली में 1.5 लाख युवा शारीरिक मानसिक परीक्षाओं से गुजरकर सरहद पे जाने के लिए तैयार खड़ा था। उसे भर्ती पत्र नहीं दिया, उसे यह कहा गया पक्की भर्ती खत्म कर दी गई है, ठेके की 4 साल की नौकरी है, करनी है करिए, नहीं करनी मत करिए। सवाल उठा लोकतंत्र में कि 4 साल के बाद क्या होगा, 4 साल के बाद क्या होगा? तो जवाब मिलता है, बड़े बड़े उद्योगपतियों के यहाँ, बड़ी बड़ी उद्योग इंडस्ट्री में आपको चौकीदार की नौकरी दी जाएगी, क्योंकि आप ट्रेंड किए गए हैं सेना द्वारा। ये स्वीकार हमें नहीं है, इसलिए हम इसके ऊपर व्यापक चर्चा चाहते हैं। लेकिन तानाशाहियों से इस देश पे अगर चीजें थोपी जाएंगी, उन्हें कुचला जाएगा। ईडी का जिक्र किया जा रहा है। ईडी का कन्विक्शन रेट कितना है? 5000 से अधिक मामले दर्ज होते हैं, एफआईआर होती है, कितनों में चार्जशीट नहीं, और कन्विक्शन रेट क्या है? 0.46। 10 साल कम थे। हम पूछना चाहते हैं, 10 साल कम थे सत्ता में आप हैं, जांच एजेंसी आपकी, फाइलें आपकी, लेकिन सिर्फ विपक्ष की आवाजों को कुचलने के लिए आप संवैधानिक संस्थाओं का दुरुपयोग कर रहे हैं। कल खबर आती है कि कांग्रेस के 9 भाई खातों को इनकम टैक्स ने सीज कर दिया है। एक हफ्ते में चुनावों की घोषणा है और हमारे बैंक खाते सीज किए जा रहे हैं। 200 करोड़ का जुर्माना लगाया जा रहा है। कारण 18 और 19 में इनकम टैक्स भरने में 40 दिन की देरी की थी। 18 और 19 में देरी की थी। 5 साल बाद आज चुनावों की घोषणा से पहले आप हम पे 200 की पेनल्टी लगाते हैं, 200 करोड़ की, और हमारे खाते सीज करने की बात करते हैं। तो ये लोकतंत्र में क्या है? चिंता नहीं है कि कांग्रेस के खाते सीज किए गए, चिंता यह है कि ये विपक्ष है। लोकतंत्र में सत्ता के साथ विपक्ष की भी आवाजों को सुने जाना बेहद जरूरी है। विधानसभा में रही और मेरी नेता सोनिया गांधी जी जब हम सत्ता में तो मुझे कहती थी, अलका किसी को सुनो ना सुनो, सुषमा स्वराज को सुना करो। वो विपक्ष में है, कैसे बोलती हैं, कैसे मुद्दे उठाती हैं। कल को हम भी विपक्ष में हो सकते हैं, सीखनो सुषमा स्वराज से। ये मेरी नेता सोनिया गांधी ने कहा। उन नेता सोनिया गांधी ने जो बिल्लैरी में सोनिया गांधी जी और सुषमा स्वराज जी आमने सामने लड़ती हैं, परिणाम जो भी हुए, दोनों का संसद में जो व्यवहार था वो देखा हमने। ये लोकतंत्र है, लेकिन आज इस लोकतंत्र की आवाजों को कुचला जा रहा है। राहुल गांधी जी की सदस्यता छीन ली गई, उनकी सुरक्षा छीन ली गई, उनका सरकारी आवास छीन लिया गया, उन्हें 2 साल जेल भेजने की तैयारी थी। बात यह है कि बात फिर कहूंगी राहुल गांधी की नहीं, 150 सांसदों की नहीं है जिन्हें सस्पेंड कर दिया गया। बात इस देश के उस संविधान की है, उस संविधान को आज बचाने की है, जिस संविधान ने आज आपको और हमें आजादी देकर यहां बिठा दिया है। आज उस संविधान ने हमें चर्चा करने का अधिकार दिया हुआ है। मैं आपसे हाथ जोड़कर ये कहूंगी, अगर हम अपने स्वतंत्रता सेनानियों को और अगर हम अपने संविधान निर्माताओं को सच्ची श्रद्धांजलि देना चाहते हैं तो खड़े हो जाइए इस संविधान की रक्षा के लिए। संविधान की तरफ से 2 शब्द हैं, रातों के अंधेरों में भी, रातों के अंधेरों में भी मैं दीपक सदा जलाता हूं। मैं भारत का संविधान हूं, तुमको राह दिखाता हूं। मौलिक अधिकार दिए तुमको, मौलिक अधिकार दिए तुमको, जीवन सहज बनाने को कर्तव्यों का लेखा सौंपा है, कर्तव्यों का लेखा सौंपा है, आदर्श नया गढ़ जाने को। ये हमारा संविधान है। जय संविधान, जय भारत।
Thank you, Alka. I think she highlighted how even with this constitution, there's a devious distortion of the democratic process. And fearing if we have a newer one, it could probably make things worse for democracy. The question is, we have still allowed such devious distortions of democracy to be done under the umbrella of the present constitution. So where do we go from here? And no better person to show us the way than an ex-governor, an ex-politician, and a brilliant speaker by his own right. I invite Mr. Tathagata Rai, the last speaker for this debate.
Mr. Moderator, sir, fellow panelists, ladies and gentlemen, I was under the impression here that we are debating the question of whether we need a new constitution or not whether this provision of the constitution is good or that provision of the constitution is bad. We are debating whether we will have a new constitution or will go on endlessly amending the present constitution. Unfortunately, from the other side, I have not heard even a squeak in respect of that. Therefore, a duty that devolves on the last speaker, that is to refute the statements made by the other side, is made very simple. I don't have to do it. As a matter of fact, I will take umbrage under certain statements that the proposition themselves have made. You'd be surprised, but gradually I'll slowly come to it. Ladies and gentlemen, you think of a person who is trying to dress up for a very special occasion and he puts on a suit of clothes, changes it, next 5 minutes he puts on another one, changes it again, then what is the conclusion that you will arrive at? You will arrive at the conclusion that he himself does not consider himself very handsome or pretty or any such thing. There is something wrong with his looks which he can't make good with a new suit of clothes. The problem with the Indian Constitution is basically that the Indian Constitution, ladies and gentlemen, was not made in a vacuum. As a matter of fact, right at the beginning, our Mr. Moderator had put the question or had wondered why the Indian Constitution has 145,000 words, whereas the US Constitution, which is much older, has much fewer words. I think 8,000 he said it. Why is it indeed? It is because we have had the advantage of drawing upon other constitutions. We have borrowed provisions from other constitutions, and this borrowing is not a bad thing. The borrowing, what we are gaining by other people's experiences. We have used as the basis of our constitution the Government of India Act 1935, which was passed in the British Parliament and debated over there. No Indian had any part to play in it, but nevertheless it was debated and it was considered, and then some part of it was used, some part of it was rejected. Then we have to look at the other constitutions from which the Indian Constitution is drawn upon. Apart from the Government of India Act, we of course have drawn upon the British unwritten constitution, because the British don't have any written constitution, as we all know. But we have drawn upon the British constitution and we have given ourselves the concept of parliamentary system or the cabinet system of government as opposed to the presidential system. We have drawn upon the American Constitution, whereby we have given ourselves fundamental rights, judicial review, impeachment of the president, and several others. In 250 years, this American Constitution, which is the very first written constitution of the world, had undergone only 27 ratified amendments. Six further amendments have been proposed, but they are still unratified. We have drawn upon the French Constitution. The French had several republics, totally different constitutions. They are now in the Fifth Republic. The Fifth Republic was established in 1958. And in these years, all these years since 1958, there have been 17 amendments. Thus, in American Constitution, 27 ratified amendments in 250 years, that makes it one amendment in 1 year, approximately. Similarly, the French Constitution makes it one amendment in 4 years. The Canadian Constitution was one in which we drew upon, because Canada was earlier governed by the British North America Act. Later on, since 1982, they have had a constitution from which we have adopted a very important thing called the quasi-federal system. The quasi-federal system, which means a federation with a very strong center. Now, this has been looked upon askance by several panelists over here, both from that side and from our side also. Now, I am not on the merits of it, but the point is that this was drawn because the constitution framers, in their wisdom, saw that India was such a varied country that there could be fissiparous tendencies. There could be centrifugal tendencies. In short, in very earthy Hindi, there could be tukra gang. We have to put paid to them. We have to extinguish them, any such tukra gang. That is why I drew upon the Canadian Constitution to have it. Now, Canadian Constitution, in 42 years of its existence, they have had 13 amendments, that is one in 3 years, roughly. The Irish constitution, we have drawn upon it. Irish constitution has given us the directive principles and the method of electing president. They have had, in 87 years, they have had 32 amendments. That is roughly one amendment in, say, 2.5 years. The Australian constitution, we have also drawn upon. Australian constitution has given us the idea of concurrent list. And the Australian constitution has even fewer amendments. In 124 years, they have had 8 amendments, which means 1 in 16 years. And our Indian constitution, in the 75 years of its existence, we have had 105 or 106, I'm not sure, amendments. That is roughly 1 amendment in every 8 months. Now, if you go back to the parable of that person who keeps on changing his suit, when you find that the constitution needs a change, an amendment, every 8 months, won't you come to the conclusion that you would need a new constitution? I submit before you that you would, and that is necessary. It was a change is necessary, a new constitution is necessary. Just as the Frenchmen have new republics, we now need a new republic. There are several other provisions in the constitution which require a relook. Now, we are not debating on if we need a change in the constitution, what are the changes, but nevertheless, I will allude to certain changes that we need to do it. There are no provisions in our constitution regarding the democratic principles of initiative, referendum, and recall. Initiative, referendum, and recall, I have no time to elaborate on these things, but these are very fundamental democratic principles, and if we don't have these provisions, there are the electorate or the general public is powerless before a person or before a government whom they had rightly or wrongly elected some years back, and they have to suffer that government for 5 years. Now, I am not saying that it is topical in the present time, but we'll let it rest at that. But apart from initiative, referendum, and recall, there are certain provisions in the Constitution which have not been used, which require to be used. Say, for instance, the habeas corpus has been referred to by several speakers. Now, there is another writ which is provided in the Constitution which is called quo warranto. Quo warranto means that if you ask of a person who has been elected, who is in some public office, whether that person is fit to occupy that public office or not. If he has been fomenting fissiparous tendencies, if he has been fomenting or creating trouble, creating disaffection between different parts of the population, then the people should have the right to recall or the right to ask for a writ of quo warranto. That has never been used. That is a thing which is for jurists to decide. But it is there, it is something that time is running short, but I will end. Before I end, I have to quote certain jurists, very eminent jurists. One of them is Lord Dunning. Many of you have heard of him, very, very eminent jurist who is very often quoted in Indian courts. Lord Dunning had said, law is a living organism that evolves with society adapting to changing needs and circumstances. Now, from 1950 to 2024, haven't we changed our needs and circumstances? Haven't we? I am grateful to Mr. Rupen Roy, which I was saying right at the beginning, that we have changed. There are things like internet, there are things like data security, there are things like artificial intelligence, climate change, which were inconceivable in 1950. So, on the basis of this, do we not need a new constitution, or shall we go on amending ad infinitum until we are tired of amending. There is great emphasis has been laid on basic structure. Even the basic structure is not immutable. Who said it is immutable? We have ourselves given up that constitution. It has not been given by some divinity. It has not fallen from heaven. We have ourselves given us that constitution, and under changed circumstances we can change that constitution. There are several other things which time would not permit me to elaborate upon. I'll just mention one point that Mr. Prosenjit Bose on the proposition side had mentioned. He had said India is a very old civilization, and therefore what we have from in the 1950 constitution is something which is the distillate of all that civilization. But ladies and gentlemen, imagine, could we ever, in these 5,000 years of life in India, could we ever think of anything like partition and mass migration from one part of the country to another? We had it in 1947. It is still going on. We had it on the Western Front in 1947. In the Eastern Front, it is still going on. It did happen in spots, but it is still going on, like squeezing toothpaste out of a tube. Now, do these things not need a new constitution? Do we not need to elaborate, to think afresh, instead of trying to improve upon a constitution which has so far undergone amendments, one in every 7 months or 8 months? I submit, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, that we do it. There were several other points, but we'll rest at that. And I submit before you, ladies and gentlemen, and Mr. Moderator, that it is essential that we must have a new constitution. We cannot but have a new constitution. Thank you. Jai Hind.
Thank you. This brings us to the end of the schedule of speakers. And now, as is customary, we have one speaker on each side to sum up the entire argument of that side. As is tradition, we're going to ask the opposition to sum up first, and summing up on behalf of the opposition is going to be Professor Sugata Bose. I'm afraid, Professor Bose, you have 4 minutes in view of the fact that a lot of your team members have overstepped the time. But being a democratic process, we will also give only 4 minutes to the other side to sum up.
Mr. Chairman, sir, I humbly accept the curtailment of our summing up to 4 minutes as disciplined members of this House. We all know that the preamble to our Indian Constitution is truly very beautiful. The Honorable Chief Minister stressed that point. What beautiful words! Liberty, equality, fraternity, and preceded by justice. And I was actually quite moved while I was hearing Alka Lamba say Jai Sangvidhan. But unfortunately, there are critical clauses and articles in the Constitution that do not conform to the preamble of the Constitution. When we send out our students and youth to recite the preamble of the Constitution, we should be responsible, and we should also tell them that the same Constitution's clauses can be misused by an authoritarian government in order to put them in prison without any trial. I would, in my summing up, of course, stress what we have argued from this side of the House, that this is a colonial inheritance, that all of the worst features of authoritarianism under British rule we have kept and preserved in the post-independence Indian Republic. But I would also like to directly address the elephant in the room that Mr. Prosenjit Bose spoke about. There is this fear that if we call for a new constitution, or if we even acknowledge the need for a new constitution, aren't we playing into the hands of those who believe in religious majoritarianism and centralized authoritarianism? To that, I would say that we from this side of the House are not talking about a new constitution tomorrow. All that we are saying that let us be bold enough to engage in a battle of ideas. And I said that this motion is defeatist. Why? Because a post-colonial constitution retaining numerous states of exception to the rule of law do not provide us sufficient safeguards against either religious majoritarianism or centralized authoritarianism. This is to accept defeat. If we accept that Narendra Modi and the forces of Hindutva want to go forward on their authoritarian route and established a de jure Hindu Rashtra, then I will have to say that you are giving him a walkover. They don't quite need a new constitution to go on their journey of majoritarianism and authoritarianism. All that they need to do is to translate the worst clauses that are still retained in the constitution into Sanskritic Hindi and deploy that for their authoritarianism and majoritarianism. That is why we need a new constitution for the future, to be crafted by a new generation of Indians who are committed to egalitarianism, to federalism, and to religious harmony. I will end simply by quoting the greatest president that the United States ever had, Abraham Lincoln. And he had said that every people has a constitutional right to amend the Constitution that they have been given, and also a revolutionary right to overthrow it. But we, from this side of the House, have been very constructive. We have suggested that we need a new constitution, and we have even gone further to suggest what the lineaments of a new democratic and federal constitution of India might look like. So I ask you all to exercise your wisdom, your judgment, to reject the defeatist, negativist motion that has been placed before you. Jai Hind.
And before you exercise that judgment, between you and the judgment is going to be a representative speaking for the motion, Rupen Roy. You have 4 minutes, sir.
Hello. I am a little confused because I think the opposition has damned our proposition with faint praise. Nobody has said that outright we should throw it out, and nobody has been able to say, all 4 speakers, what it will replace with. What is their proposition? Why should we throw it out? I would say that the concept of use and throw is a Western imperialistic and colonial concept. Because when we use single-use plastics, use and throw razors, this is a mentality of the West where you cannot make things enduring. The second thing is that the attack on the Indian Constitution, that it is based on the Government of India Act 1935, I would like to remind you that the British did not come to India in 1935. They won the Battle of Plassey in 1757. It was through freedom struggle. It was through lot of upheaval. It was through lot of fight that the Government of India Act 1935 came. And just because it was, if you say that the automobile is patterned after the T model Ford, therefore it is an imperialistic car, will not be right. You are just putting labels on the Constitution, giving the dog a bad name to kill it. All four speakers, we had 5 speakers actually, because the keynote speaker very categorically said that she does not want a new constitution. But all 4 speakers who have spoken against the motion, 2 of them were very muted. They were making legal quibbles. They were saying there are a lot of good things in the constitution, there are some bad things in the constitution. So, but only one of them said categorically that we need a new constitution. There is no argument. Constitution is a guiding principle. There are secondary laws and there are fundamental rights that are there. Nobody has said, except one, that there is nothing called the basic structure of the Constitution. So we have to follow the basic structure, and today, if you have to argue for a new Constitution, you must say what you want. What is wrong with the Constitution that cannot be righted by amendments? We have done it for 107 times. We'll do it for another 50 times. So, this is not a defeatist motion. We are saying that there is no case made by the opposition as to why we need to throw out our Constitution. We are all in agreement. And actually, we all agree that a living document which guides the lives of 1.4 billion people need to be changed. Someone talked about Darwin, and Darwin said that in order to survive, it is not the strongest or the fittest or the most intelligent. It is that species which can adapt itself. So therefore, we need a constitution which will adapt itself. I will leave with you a thought, as I have been a business consultant all my life. I think what we need is a tool called scenario planning. If then, we need to not sit down and say what happened in 1935, what happened, what Bhagat Singh said, what Kamath said, what Netaji said. Yes, of course, that's part of history. You will teach them in the history classes. We need a scenario planning process whereby the future challenges that are coming, how will this constitution adapt to those future challenges and become a living document that we are all proud of. Thank you. I hope you will vote for the motion.
Thank you. And before you vote for the motion, it is customary for the moderator to very briefly sum up some of the thoughts that must be playing in your mind and which will influence your judgment. We all heard about the preamble to our Constitution. Ladies and gentlemen, do you know the most beautiful words in that preamble? They are the words, we the people. It is we the people that have given us this Constitution. We have heard a lot of arguments of why this Constitution has failed. And one of the important arguments we've heard is the complete failure of federalism. We heard it in the keynote speech by our Honorable Chief Minister even before the debate began. A lot of speakers has talked about an elephant in the room. But what we have seen in West Bengal is not an elephant in the room, but 2 elephants in the room, one from the center and one from the state, fighting each other in the confines of the room. And can you imagine what has happened to the inhabitants in terms of federalism? Federalism has talked about double-engine train, meaning a train that is pulled by one engine and pushed by the other. But when you live in West Bengal, we have double-engine trains which have one engine pulling in each direction. And can you imagine what happens to the passengers that occupy the compartments in between? And that has been failed federalism as well. We've heard the argument that too many changes necessitate a complete change. Somebody talked about the person who needs to change his clothes every few minutes should have a complete overhaul of clothes. The worry is you don't want it to become like the emperor's new clothes. We've all been told that the two pillars of our constitutional democracy has been the judiciary and the media. In this country, the judiciary is appointed in dark rooms, attended by the executive and the judiciary themselves. Previously, it had more judiciary, less executives. Now, worryingly, it has more executives and less judiciary, deciding on which judiciary should be the people who will ultimately interpret the Constitution itself. The biggest criticisms of the Constitution comes from the media. And we have seen what our political masters all over the country, in the center and in the states, have done to stop that criticism. They have bought up the media. And it makes you wonder whether it's time that we address these issues rather than think of changing the whole Constitution. The question this debate has thrown up is, do we just need changes, or do we really need a metamorphosis? Because you need to paint and repair your house regularly, do you need to change your house or demolish it and build a new one? Because one of your organs in the body has been troubling you and you need medicines regularly, perhaps even surgery, does that mean you should go to a transplant surgeon and have that organ replaced completely? I think the motion that we're debating today, India does not need a new constitution, is fundamentally a debate between those who think that there is need for change and those who think there is change of the need itself. And I think we should consider this. Is there a need for change of the Constitution? Or is there a need of change of the process of accountability for those who uphold, interpret, and criticize our Constitution? And I leave you with these thoughts as I ask you to raise your hands if you think that the motion for today, this House believes India does not need a new constitution, has been carried. In that case, please raise your right hands. Maybe you can help with the counting, Jimmy. You're better at counting than I am. Okay, so why don't we ask those that are against the motion and think that India does need a new constitution to raise your hands? Jimmy, it looks like a very narrow margin, but I think we have to say that the proposition has carried today.
Honorable Chief Minister of West Bengal, respected Srimati Mamata Banerjee, distinguished participants of the debate, honorable past presidents of our club, dignitaries, fellow members and guests. On behalf of the committee, I extend a warm welcome to you all. At the outset, our sincere gratitude and heartfelt thanks to you, Madam, for being with us today in spite of your extremely busy schedule. You had participated in the national debate as a speaker, held on 7th November 2009, which I, along with many members, were present and attended the meeting. We highly appreciate your kind gesture to attend and address the August gathering. I thank ABP Group for making this happen. Our relationship with the ABP Group is long-standing, which we respect, enjoy, and cherish. For years together, this annual event is considered to be a signature event of our iconic club, which is also of national significance. And it creates great enthusiasm and interest, not only among our members, but in our society as well. We all look forward to it. Our century-old institution, founded in 1907 with a total membership strength of 4,800, one of the highest social clubs of the country, is a standalone institution which germinated on the principle of equal representation between Indians and Europeans. Since then, it has attracted people from all walks of life, professionals, business, literary personalities, and other significant personalities from all walks of society. This conglomeration of eminent personalities makes it truly an intellectual hub of our society. We daily deliberate on every topic in this universe and always agree to disagree. Madam, you will be happy to know that our club is probably one of the first social clubs in our country to extend membership to ladies way back in 2007, which was our centenary year. And this speaks of our adherence to the principles of equality, diversity, and inclusiveness.